One single decision could cost more than a house. In the early 1970s, while most people were buying family cars for just a few $1,000s, there was an entirely different world. A world where some cars cost twice as much, sometimes 3 times as much, and in certain cases, simply made no sense at all, because it wasn't just about transportation. It was about status, power, and an almost irrational need to have the very best, no matter the price. And that's exactly where this list starts to get really interesting, because today, you're going to see cars that, for their time, were absurdly expensive. Machines that very few people could even consider buying. And trust me, some of the prices you're about to see are still hard to believe even today. Let's begin. 1975, Mercury Grand Marquis. We start with a car that, at first glance, doesn't seem to belong on this list. Because when people talk about expensive cars in the 1970s, most immediately think of Cadillac or Imperial. But Mercury had something to say too, and it did it in a very particular way. Visually, the Grand Marquis represented classic American luxury, a massive body, straight lines, plenty of chrome, and a presence that filled the road effortlessly. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't exclusive, but it was solid, and that's exactly what many buyers were looking for, a car that communicated status, without drawing too much attention. But what's interesting is that within Mercury's lineup, this model sat at the very top. It was the best the brand had to offer, and that was reflected in the price. In 1975, a well-equipped Mercury Grand Marquis could cost around $4,500, a significant amount at the time. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $25,000 to $30,000 today. It wasn't the most expensive car in America, but it was definitely above most. And as expected, it delivered what was needed to justify it. Under the hood, it could be equipped with large V8 engines, delivering smooth, steady power focused more on comfort than outright performance. This was a car built for cruising, for long-distance travel in silence, with a relaxed and stable ride. Today, that character makes it an accessible classic. A well-preserved 1975 Mercury Grand Marquis typically sells between $8,000 and $20,000, depending on condition. It's not the most exclusive, it's not the most eye-catching, but it plays a key role in this list, because it represents that point where luxury started to get expensive, before everything became completely excessive. 1971, Oldsmobile 98. And now we step up, into a level where luxury starts to feel truly serious. Because if the Mercury represented accessible luxury, the Oldsmobile was already playing in a different league. Visually, this car commanded respect. The body was massive, with long proportions, elegant lines, and that perfect balance between sophistication and presence. It didn't need to exaggerate, it looked expensive, from every angle. But what makes the 98 interesting is its positioning. Oldsmobile wasn't Cadillac, but it wasn't a common brand either. It sat right in that middle ground, where luxury became more refined, quieter, and more exclusive than most people realize. And that was directly reflected in the price. In 1971, a well-equipped Oldsmobile 98 could exceed $5,300. And here's the comparison. At the same time, a basic family car could cost between $3,000 and $3,500, meaning you were paying almost double for comfort, silence, and prestige. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $35,000 to $40,000 today. But the price wasn't just about the name. Under the hood, it featured engines like the 455 cubic inch V8, delivering an extremely smooth driving experience with massive torque and a constant sense of effortless power. This wasn't a car meant for aggressive acceleration. It was a car meant to dominate the road without trying. Inside, the level of comfort was on another level. Wide seats, soft materials, and a driving experience designed to completely isolate the driver from the outside world. Today, that balance between classic luxury and subtlety keeps it very interesting in the market. A well-maintained 1971 Oldsmobile 98 typically sells between $15,000 and $30,000. It wasn't the most expensive, but it already made one thing very clear. Luxury in the 1970s wasn't for everyone. 1973, Pontiac Grand Ville. Now, we step into a territory that often goes unnoticed, but at the time represented one of the highest levels within Pontiac. Because when people talk about luxury in the 1970s, almost everyone looks at Cadillac, Lincoln, or Imperial. But Pontiac had its own interpretation of luxury, and it was far more serious than it might seem. Visually, the Grand Ville was imposing, long, wide, with smooth lines and a presence that filled the road effortlessly. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't sporty, it was dominant. The kind of car that didn't need to draw attention to command respect. But what makes it interesting is that this model sat at the very top of Pontiac's lineup. It was the best the brand had to offer in terms of comfort, size, and prestige, and naturally, that came at a price. In 1973, a well-equipped Grand Ville could cost around $5,500. And here's where the comparison shifts. At that same time, the average annual salary in the United States was around $9,000, meaning this car could cost more than half of a person's yearly income. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $35,000 to $45,000 today. But the Grand Ville wasn't just expensive, it was comfortable on a level that justified it. Under the hood, it featured large V8 engines like the 455, delivering smooth, steady power designed to move that massive body effortlessly. This was a car built for cruising, for gliding down the road without effort. Today, that character makes it an interesting and often overlooked classic. A well-preserved 1973 Pontiac Grand Ville typically sells between $12,000 and $28,000, depending on condition. And now, I want to hear your opinion. Out of the cars we've seen so far, the understated Mercury Grand Marquis, the refined Oldsmobile 98, or this imposing Pontiac Grand Ville, which one do you find the most interesting? Let me know in the comments. 1970, Chrysler 300 Hurst. And now we take a leap into something much rarer. Because while the cars we've seen so far were expensive due to luxury and size, this one enters for a completely different reason: exclusivity. Visually, the 300 Hurst already made it clear it wasn't a typical Chrysler. The white paint with gold accents, the more aggressive design, and its unique details made it stand out even among the large sedans of the time. It was bold, but still elegant. But what truly made it special wasn't just how it looked, it was its production. Chrysler built only about 500 units of this model, and that changes everything, because now we're no longer just talking about an expensive car. We're talking about something very few people could actually own. And of course, that was reflected in the price. In 1970, a Chrysler 300 Hurst cost around $5,900. At the same time, you could buy a brand new Ford Mustang for under $3,000, meaning this Chrysler cost nearly double one of the most popular cars in America. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $40,000 to $45,000 today. But the price wasn't just about exclusivity. Under the hood, it featured a massive 440 TNT V8, delivering strong, steady power, far more serious than its size might suggest. It was big, heavy, but it wasn't slow. It was a very interesting blend of luxury and performance. Today, that combination, along with its low production, has made it highly desirable. A well-preserved 1970 Chrysler 300 Hurst typically sells between $60,000 and $120,000, with exceptional examples going even higher. 1971 Buick Riviera. Now we enter one of the most iconic and controversial designs of the entire decade. Because this car wasn't just expensive, it was different. Visually, there was nothing else like it on the road. The sloped rear end, known as the boat tail, completely broke away from traditional American coupe design. It was bold, it was elegant, and for many, unforgettable. But what's interesting is that Buick wasn't trying to compete directly with Cadillac. They wanted to create something different, a luxury car, with its own identity. And it worked, because the Riviera wasn't just about design, it had presence. Under the hood, it carried the massive 455 cubic inch V8, delivering smooth but powerful performance, perfect for a large, refined coupe. It wasn't a pure muscle car, But it wasn't slow either. It sat right in that middle ground that Buick understood very well. And all of that came at a price. In 1971, a Buick Riviera could cost between $5,500 and $6,000, depending on configuration. And here's where the comparison shifts again. At that time, a house in the United States could cost around $25,000, meaning, for the price of 5 Rivieras, you could buy an entire house. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $40,000 to $45,000 today. But the Riviera offered something many cars didn't: identity. Today, that design has made it a true cult classic. A well-preserved 1971 Buick Riviera typically sells between $25,000 and $60,000, with exceptional examples reaching even higher values. It wasn't the most expensive, but it was one of the most memorable. 1975 to 1979 Lincoln Continental Town Car. If there's one car that truly defines what luxury meant in the 1970s, it's this one. Big, elegant, imposing. Visually, there was no doubt. The body was massive, with straight lines, long proportions, and a design that practically screamed status from every angle. This wasn't a car meant to go unnoticed. It was a car meant to arrive and be seen. But what's interesting is that Lincoln wasn't trying to innovate. It was trying to be the best at something very specific, classic American luxury. And it succeeded. Inside, the level of comfort was extremely high. Wide seats, soft materials, near total isolation from the outside world. Everything was designed to make every journey feel like moving through a living room on wheels. But that level of refinement came at a price. In 1975, a town car could cost between $8,000 and $9,000, depending on the equipment. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $50,000 to $60,000 today. But you weren't just paying for size or comfort. You were paying for presence. Under the hood, it featured large V8 engines like the 460, delivering an extremely smooth ride, plenty of torque, and a constant sense of effortless power. It wasn't fast in the traditional sense, but it felt dominant. Today, that character keeps it as one of the most respected classics of the era. A well-preserved Lincoln Continental Town car typically sells between $20,000 and $45,000, with exceptional examples going even higher. It was luxury without compromise. And now, I want to hear your opinion. Out of all the cars we've seen so far, which one truly represents American luxury in the 1970s? Let me know in the comments, because what's coming next takes us straight into the territory where prices start to become truly serious. 1974 to 1978 Imperial LeBaron. And now we enter a level where luxury was no longer just an option. It was a statement. Because during the 1970s, Imperial wasn't just a model within Chrysler, it was its own brand. Created specifically to compete with Cadillac and Lincoln at the very top of the American market. And the LeBaron represented exactly that. Visually, this car projected authority. The body was massive, with very straight lines, a clean and elegant design, and a presence that didn't need exaggeration to dominate. It was luxury, in its purest form. But what makes it interesting is that, unlike many cars on this list, the Imperial had something extra. Real exclusivity, because it wasn't produced in large numbers, and that made it less common, even in its own time. Naturally, that positioning was reflected in the price. In 1974, an Imperial LeBaron could cost between $8,500 and $9,500, depending on configuration. And here's where the comparison shifts again. At that time, the average annual salary in the United States was around $10,000 to $11,000, meaning this car could cost nearly an entire year's income. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $55,000 to $70,000 today. But the Imperial didn't justify its price with size or name alone. Under the hood, it featured engines like the 440 cubic inch V8, delivering smooth, quiet, and extremely refined power. It was a car built to move with authority, effortlessly. Inside, the level of luxury matched the best Detroit had to offer. High-quality materials, detailed finishes, and a driving experience that felt truly exclusive. Today, that status keeps it as one of the most interesting and less common American luxury cars of the 1970s. A well-preserved Imperial LeBaron typically sells between $18,000 and $40,000, with exceptional examples reaching even higher values. It wasn't the most famous, but it was one of the most exclusive, and from here on, we're entering the absolute peak of American luxury. 1971 to 1973, Cadillac Fleetwood Brougham. If there was one car in the 1970s that represented American luxury taken to the extreme, it was this. It wasn't a flashy coupe. It wasn't an experimental car. It was something much more direct. The best sedan Cadillac could build. Visually, the Fleetwood commanded presence from every angle. The body was long, incredibly elegant, with straight lines and a presence that practically dominated the road. This wasn't a car meant to be driven fast. It was a car meant to arrive. But what truly set it apart was its positioning. Fleetwood wasn't just a name. It was the division responsible for Cadillac's most exclusive models. And the Brougham was reserved for buyers who wanted the absolute best. And that was directly reflected in the price. In 1972, a Fleetwood Brougham could cost between $9,000 and $10,000. And here comes one of the strongest comparisons so far. At that same time, you could buy two brand new Chevrolets for the price of this Cadillac, meaning this car didn't compete with the market, it stood above it. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $60,000 to $75,000 today. But Cadillac wasn't just selling size or prestige, it was selling an experience. Under the hood, it featured engines like the 472 or 500 cubic inch V8, delivering an incredibly smooth ride, massive torque, and a constant sense of effortless power. It didn't need to prove anything. It simply had it all. Inside, the level of luxury was exactly what you'd expect. Massive seats, soft materials, total isolation from the outside world, and a driving experience that felt closer to floating than rolling. Today, that status keeps it as one of the most respected Cadillacs of its era. A well-preserved Cadillac Fleetwood Brougham typically sells between $20,000 and $50,000, with exceptional examples going even higher. 1976 Cadillac Eldorado convertible. And now, we step into one of the most symbolic and most expensive cars of the entire decade. Because this wasn't just a luxury car, it was an event. Cadillac introduced it as the last American convertible, creating a sense of urgency that led thousands of buyers to pay extremely high prices for something that, in theory, would never exist again. And that completely changed how it was perceived. Visually, the Eldorado was exactly what you'd expect from 1970s American luxury. Massive, elegant, with smooth lines, long proportions, and a presence that felt made for cruising wide-open boulevards. But as a convertible, everything felt even more special. This was a car to be seen in, to be enjoyed, to represent a lifestyle. And all of that came at a price. In 1976, it had a base price of around $11,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $60,000 to $70,000 today. But the Eldorado wasn't just sold on luxury. It also delivered power. Under the hood, it carried the massive 500 cubic inch V8, one of the largest engines ever installed in a production car, delivering huge torque and an incredibly smooth driving experience. Today, all that history has turned it into one of Cadillac's most valued classics. A well-preserved 1976 Cadillac Eldorado convertible typically sells between $25,000 and $60,000, with exceptional examples reaching even higher. It wasn't just an expensive car, it was a symbol, but even that doesn't compare to what comes next. 1971 to 1976 Stutz Blackhawk. And now we reach the end of this list, but also the car that completely breaks all the rules. Because after seeing Cadillac, Lincoln, and Imperial, you might think we've already seen the most expensive America had to offer. But no, this car operated on another level entirely. Visually, it looked like nothing else on the road. Long, exaggerated with sharp lines, gold accents, prominent wheels, and a presence that felt closer to a piece of art than a production car. It wasn't trying to be subtly elegant, it was trying to impress. And it succeeded, but what truly set it apart wasn't just its design, it was its price. When it was launched in the early 1970s, the Stutz Blackhawk had a base price of around $22,500. That's double the price of some of the most expensive Cadillacs of the time. But that wasn't all. As the decade went on, the price kept rising. Some units exceeded $40,000, something completely out of scale for the era. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $150,000 to over $250,000 today. Without a doubt, it was one of the most expensive cars you could buy in the United States. And there was a reason for that. Each unit was essentially hand-built. Ultra-luxurious interiors, exclusive materials, unique details, and a level of customization that placed it far beyond Detroit's mass production. This wasn't a car for the general public. It was a car for celebrities, business elites, and people who wanted something no one else had. Today, that character keeps it as a very unique piece in the classic car world. A well-preserved Stutz Blackhawk typically sells between $80,000 and $150,000, with exceptional or historically significant examples going far beyond that. It wasn't the fastest, it wasn't the most practical, but it was the one that best represented the absolute extreme of this list. And now, after seeing all these cars, one thing becomes very clear. In the 1970s, the price of a car was no longer just about luxury. It was about how far each manufacturer was willing to go. Some focused on size, others on comfort, others on exclusivity, and some simply decided to ignore any kind of limit. And now, I want to hear your opinion. Out of all the cars we saw today, from the imposing Cadillac Fleetwood, the elegant Lincoln Continental, to the completely over-the-top Stutz Blackhawk, which one do you find the most impressive? Let me know in the comments, because that's where the real conversation begins. And if you enjoyed this journey through the most expensive cars of the 1970s, I recommend the video currently on your screen, where we explore the most expensive American cars of the 1960s, a decade where it all began, where luxury started to escalate, and where many of the ideas that define this era were born. Click and continue the saga, and I'll see you in the next video.